Hello, this is Mary Cole with the Good Story Podcast, all about the writing life, the publishing life, and everything in between. I want to thank our Good Story Company team. You can learn more about us at goodstorycompany.com, and I'm thrilled to bring you today's show. Here's to a good story. Thank you for joining us here at the Good Story Podcast. I am Mary Cole, and with me I have young adult author Farrah Penn. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Why don't you tell the good people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Farrah. I grew up in North Texas and have just loved reading and writing for feels like my whole entire life. And I knew at one point I would love to pursue publishing a book, and that didn't happen. And I started taking myself more seriously after college. I studied creative writing in college and English. And I feel like all of that was just kind of helping and building my way towards a writing career. And shortly after college, I wrote a young adult novel and found a literary agent. And I feel like that's the condensed version of how I got here.
You make it sound so easy peasy lemon squeezy.
It really wasn't. There's a long
the good people aren't here for easy peasy lemon squeezy. We want a little suffering with our publishing stories.
Wouldn't it be great if everyone just had just the easiest time and everyone got 6-figure book deals and it was all easy and great?
Publishing is not the field for you if you want the 6-figure book deals, the financial security, never having to deal with deadlines. Unfortunately, no. I don't want to, make your story shadowy and fraught if it wasn't. But yeah, how long do you think it took you overall to get to that next step?
Yeah, so I think the longer version of my publishing story was in 2011. After college, I was like, I love the young adult space. I was loving reading young adult books and also adult books as well. But I knew, like, for me, I wanted to write a young adult book. This book in particular was a young adult dystopian book. It was the era of like Hunger Games and Divergent.
Oh yeah, it was like the hot time for all of those. And so you kind of came to the field reading YA, because I was going to ask, of course, why young adult?
Yeah, I grew up reading it. I grew up reading, like in my era, it was like Sarah Dessen and Meg Cabot. Definitely not as like wide and diverse as it is now. It's so great to see how much it's grown. But those were like two authors in particular I was reading when I was a young adult. And so, yeah, I think I knew I was like, I love this space and like just the coming of age of it all. And that's kind of the genre where I landed.
So you were saying it was the heyday of Hunger Games, Divergent, all of these kind of blockbuster, kind of dystopian books.
Yes. And so I had written, I thought it felt very like commercial and high stakes. And I think my literary agent like would agree. That's the book she signed me with. And I do feel like that part happened like pretty fast. I think like within 6 months, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Which, yeah, at that time, it feel fast for me. But the other side of it is that for this publishing journey, this is not my debut. If you Google me, you will not find that book because it didn't sell. And so when that book was on submission, a piece of writing advice like a lot of authors will give is work on your next project. And so that's what I was doing. I was writing another young adult book. This one was more of like the mystery thriller genre. And when the dystopian young adult book didn't sell, a while later we went out with the mystery book, which also it didn't sell as well. And I feel like shortly after that there was a pitch opportunity for, I think if this was a while ago, so let me try and remember. I think it was like a certain editor looking for young adult romance or contemporary. And so I had written some sample chapters and a pitch for that. And like that also didn't sell. So I think at that point I was like, man, am I gonna am I gonna ever do this? Like, what am I
Yeah.
doing wrong? Is it me? Is it? And I think, as I've gotten older and just sort of like reflected back on that time, it really is like a mix of things. It's like, an editor has to connect with it, and not only an editor has to connect, but then they got to take it, to like the big bosses and the publishing company. And it's just like, there's so many things that have to align in order for like a book to sell. And, it wasn't my time, but I kept going. And so just the short of this whole part of my saga is the next book I wrote was a contemporary novel, a young adult novel called 12 Steps to Normal. And that book would end up becoming my debut, to my surprise, because it was like the least commercial book I had written at that point.
Yeah. Hi, doggy.
I'm
We are a very dog. No,
sorry.
we are a dog friendly. Yeah, my kids have like come in when I've been doing webinars, and like I categorically tell them, I'm like, when I'm doing something, like you don't, but they come in, they cheese, they don't understand why like people can't like talk back to them. Anyway, so no worries at all. Did your agent stick by you? I mean, was that kind of an anxiety of yours of like, hey, am I ever going to sell? And is this person a champion for me?
Yeah, she has been a champion, and she has stuck by me and was very supportive of, like, the next ideas. Even with 12 steps, I was, again, like, I am still surprised because this debut came out for me in 2018, so it sold in 2016. And it is, I feel like, a coming of age, like quieter contemporary story. And so she, was still game to, find the right editors for it, and did find one who was passionate about it, and which was great because I love her dearly. I think she's great. And so yeah, it worked out. It didn't go exactly the way I thought it would in my mind, but or the way I maybe like hoped or wished it would. But um, yeah, it's, I guess, and then the advice like I will give to writers is just like, just keep going, just work on the next thing, because you never know what will happen.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So it seems like your first entry into the game was more trend forward. You called it high stakes. It was very commercial at the time because it was in that hot dystopian market that was raging around 2011. And that didn't go. And then you tried another kind of genre project with a mystery thriller suspense idea. Then you tried contemporary realistic, and that on proposal kind of didn't work out either. You finally found success in your true debut with something that you're saying, oh, it wasn't as commercial, it was a little quieter. I'm surprised that it played out this way. Why do you think that is? And is that maybe a blessing in disguise? Do you have kind of more of a genre sensibility about you as a writer, or are you happier that you found a home in contemporary realistic?
Um, I mean, yeah, I will say to that, I am glad I debuted in the contemporary space. And like when I reflect on it and look back, I'm like, oh, this makes sense because I was reading so much like contemporary
Well, I was going to say
genre.
Sarah Dessen,
Yeah,
that contemporary romance, very much grounded in our world, like small towns, hanging out on the dock.
yeah,
It's been a long time since I've read Sarah Dessen.
I think you nailed it. um, but I mean, I do enjoy genre. I feel like I don't know, I love writing just so many different things. I know that it's smart, and a lot of times people want to like kind of brand you into like one specific genre, but I enjoy like the challenge and just like the joy of writing, trying different things. but yeah, the two books that I have out now are both contemporary young adult, and that is also a space I enjoy writing in, and like would hope to continue enjoy writing in.
So I think a lot of writers when they're at that place where you were in 2011, 2015, whatever, they try to be commercial. And they may not know what that means. They may not, they have ideas about the market. So you were looking at the market, you took your swing at commercial. What does the process in your head look like for creating a story when you're like, oh man, I'm going to make this as commercial as possible? And maybe some of your other ideas that are quieter, like, do you have a different approach?
I don't know if I think I was doing it consciously when I was writing
Mm.
like those first two books. I think it was just like, here's the idea. It came to me, and it just like happened to be like a more commercial idea. I would say, like, if you ask me now as a writer, I do think I'm a little bit more intentional with it. If I'm like, if I have an idea for a story, I'm like, okay, like what's the genre? Like what are the stakes? Like what are the turning points? And um, all the story beats, kind of like thinking about it a little bit more critically than I was in my earlier stages of the career.
So, how do you approach a story idea? I'm not asking where you get your ideas because I think that a lot of people think that's an asinine question because it's like, I don't know. They come sometimes. But it does sound like you are more, you said intentional, you plan a little bit more. Are you an outliner? Like, how do you approach? So, you have a nugget, right? You have a
Mhm.
nugget in your hands, and what does Fairy do next?
Yeah, how do I approach story? Great question. I would say now as a writer, I feel like in the earlier stages, I think I was more of a pantser. Like here's the nugget, and I'm just gonna run with it and see like where it goes. And that was, I think, a little bit harder approach because I would get stuck at a certain point. And I think now I at least try and use, like Save the Cat. Just I reading a little bit more craft books than I was in the earlier stages of my career. And also, I started doing screenwriting like 4 years ago, and that really helped me focus on like the structure and plot of it all, and like kind of nail the beats. So if I'm approaching a story now, I'll at least have like a one sentence plot that I hope will happen within like the beat sheet of a story. And I'll use that as a my guide yeah, as my guide to writing the book. And I think in all the cases where I've done this, I'll kind of have like this rough guide, and I'll know where the story's going. Like I'll know where it's supposed to end. I'll know where the middle is. I know like what's going to happen, but sometimes things take me by surprise, or I'll have like a character whose motivation like changes, or something, like little things that happen in the story that take me by surprise that will kind of change the story. Not change the story a little bit from like what the original outline was.
So
So
you, by structuring your work now and
mhm.
taking more of an organized approach, you mentioned Save the Cat. Do you use Save the Cat, the Blake Snyder original, or the Save the Cat Writes a Novel, the Jessica Brody
um
adaptation?
I think I've read both.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of what I did for this last book. I think it was the Blake Snyder approach.
The OG.
Yeah, and it was just, I forget where I found it. It must have been somewhere online. It was like a beat sheet that you could fill in yourself, and I was like, "Okay, here are the things that I know will happen, or like should happen, or I should be hitting these things."
And so it's like the bumpers at the bowling alley. You
Mhm.
try to hew pretty close to what you planned, even though, of course, dialogue, individual scene, beat to beat moments are going to be, fairly changeable as characters. You start to get to know your characters. You start to sort of massage those relationships. But you really like to plan, and once you have the plan, you stick to it.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think it helps having that plan or that guide, just so I don't reach the middle of the book and then I'm like, and then what happens? Let me think about it forever and take a really long time finishing. But if I like take maybe a little bit of a longer time in the beginning stages thinking about things, then at least I'm like, okay, I know where this train is supposed to go.
I had a client say one time that when you outline, the thinking is already done. And I have just clung to that for the longest time. I do think that there are different skills, right? You have the big structural thinking, and it sounds like you've been really putting a premium on learning that, reading more guidebooks, doing some screenwriting to really internalize structure. But I love this idea of like, okay, the big picture thinking is done. I can do scene thinking, I can do character thinking, I can do dialogue thinking, description, setting thinking, all of that, and kind of the sentence level thinking as you're composing, but the pieces are in place.
Yeah, oh, I do love that a lot. Yeah, the thinking is already done, so you don't have to go back to that thinking stage as you're writing it. Yeah.
How do you power through that muddy middle? So, structure obviously is your guide. What do you put in the structure of a middle to really kind of buttress that story? What do you think is important to hit in that long stretch?
Yeah, this is a great question because I still, I think, even at this stage, struggle a little bit with middles because you gotta make sure, your character's journey and the stakes of what they're going through, the internal and the external, you're still hitting that journey is still clear, and you're also kind of throwing maybe some, like, curveballs at them. I think, maybe for me, I would say I don't make it easy for them, like, always throw something to make it a little bit interesting because, yeah, if it's too easy and the problems are too easy to solve, then the resolution kind of feels like it's happening maybe a little bit too early.
And when you throw curveballs, subplots, I think you have a romantic subplot in the book that was released. We should probably give the titles of your books. So
12 Steps to
12
Normal,
Step
Tracy
to
Wright.
Normal, right?
And then, the book that came out this year, 2024, in March, is called Canceled. Both are contemporary, young adult books.
Yeah. So if you are planning a subplot or you are throwing a romance plot in there, how do you pick? Because it can't be too far left field, out of complete nowhere. These curveballs. How do you select a juicy sort of component of the story to kind of put into the mix?
Ooh, how do I select the juicy components? I think it I guess I can speak to Canceled because that's my most recent book. Um, the in the opening chapter, it opens with, like, a teenage girl who's, realized, like, essentially she's been canceled, but it's for this thing that she didn't do. She's been falsely framed, for this, like, video that's gotten leaked and got around her school. And so I thought, okay, who is the type of character who is equipped, I guess, to take on this journey, and like what would her journey look like? And then sort of like looking at, if I give this plot problem to this character, yeah, like, what is she like? What type of person is she? Like, what are her friends like? What is her romantic life like and her family life like? And I think that all, is part of the contemporary genre anyway. Grounded in reality and also high school because you have your family and your friends and they're all part of your life at that stage. And so, yeah, I think character is really important, and just kind of looking at, like, what type of person is she? And for this character, she was very much like a fix-it girly. She was like, I can solve all my problems. And I was like, okay, well, if she's, then what is like the internal problem? And part of that was like, does she, have trouble like reaching out for help? And so I guess all that to say is like really taking a look at like who your character is, getting to know them like one of your friends, and taking and figuring out like why they are the ones and to go on this journey and how they will handle all the problems that you're about to throw at them as an author.
I love that. So you shape the plot. It's like, why this character for this story, right? Did she come into your head clearly with this concept for Canceled, or was it the scenario and you kind of built a character for the scenario?
I think it was a little bit of both, because I had this opening chapter where this character, shows up to this Halloween party in a banana costume. And I was like,
Love that.
who is this character? Because that could not be me in high school. Like, that was absolutely not me. But I just kind of loved, like, okay, then she's probably confident, maybe like a little bit sure of herself. And, what happens when that confidence is kind of like thrown, and how does she handle it? So that was one portion of like that popped into my head. And then the other portion was more of the plot. Like, what if, she wasn't this, it was incorrect. Like the video that is getting blamed on her is like incorrect. And then how do you go about fixing that issue? So for that book particularly, I would say just a little bit of both.
That's great. So I want to talk about stakes. Here, it seems like obviously for any teen, reputation is huge. Their social lives, kind of the esteem of their family, even though they don't want to admit that they care, Um, so how did you raise the stakes and also kind of challenge her? How did she maintain agency as a character? Because this is something like when something so big and so external happens, and esteem is sort of in the eye of the beholder. So a lot of other characters hold the keys to whether she has her reputation or not. Was it a challenge to make her still empowered as a protagonist and proactive as a protagonist when all of this was kind of happening to her?
Yeah, I think so. And because I was aware like the things that were happening to her, I wanted her to kind of go about it and like be proactive, but also make mistakes along the way. Because, just as humans, we are not perfect. And also me in high school, and I just think, when you're young, like you're also like making mistakes, and like that's okay because that's how we learn. So I know that was like one thing that was on my mind, because I was like, this book isn't like a life or death situation. It is, it's grounded in reality, and it's high school, but also it's like high school can feel so insular that it can feel so much bigger. And the stakes, I think, can feel like higher, especially, if your reputation is questioned, and, people are mad at you, and, and you're still trying to like, get into college and like deal with all these other things. Um, yeah, I forget what the question was, but
I forget what the question was too, but there's so many good things to pick out of your response. There's sort of the perceived stakes, but I think that is where your young adult characters live. Everything feels a little heightened. And do you have any challenges kind of tapping into that mindset? How do you thread the needle between this feels very real, this feels high stakes, and maybe melodrama, because it could easily veer into that territory?
Yeah, wait, this is actually so funny that you asked me about melodrama, because I spoke to a friend of mine as a teacher, and she has some high school interns over the summer that she's mentoring. And I talked to them over Zoom yesterday, and a question was like, how do you make it dramatic without being melodramatic? And I was like, oh, this is a great question. I have to like think about this for a second.
I'm so glad we're getting version 2.0 now that now that you've had some time to marinate with it.
Yeah. And I think I can only speak from like my personal experience writing and as a writer, but I was like, what, how do I tap into things that can heighten the drama, but it doesn't feel cheesy or it doesn't feel corny and it doesn't feel inauthentic. And I think I was just going back to what, yeah, like what feels authentic from my main character and like how would she go about this in an authentic way while still throwing some problems at her and like having her create some problems too because again humans aren't perfect. So I think I don't have like the one golden answer to this, but
Sure,
I
no.
guess if something is not hitting authentic for you for your story, if it feels like a little corny or cheesy, I think like really maybe listen to that gut feeling would be my advice.
Do you feel pressure kind of in that vein writing YA and sort of passing that authenticity sniff test with a younger audience?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would say I feel pressure as, a 30-something writer writing.
Not to give you a complex, I feel like your face was just like, oh, do I have to start thinking about
I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, you hope that you're doing a good job and tapping into um, the right things and the right themes.
If you want to go deep into your characters in fiction or memoir, please check out my book, Writing Interiority, Crafting Irresistible Characters. I am so proud of this book. It's one I have wanted to write for over a decade. It has occupied every moment of my brain, heart, and mind for the year that I was writing it, and I cannot wait to share it with writers like you. Please look for Writing Interiority wherever you buy your books, and I hope you enjoy it. And so it seems like your first book deals with addiction and is a little bit heavier. This one deals mostly with social relationships. Are you braiding all kind of like, do you find yourself focusing on one over the other? Do you try to build kind of everything into this person's life? How do you flesh out what's going on around them and how comprehensive you get?
Yeah, I guess speaking to 12 Steps to Normal, which is my debut novel, I am like, or I was like the child of an alcoholic growing up. And so
Mhm.
there's like some like things that I went through that like internalize that I think kind of come out as like themes or like character journeys in both books. And I think in both Canceled and 12 Steps to Normal, something I was really looking at, whether it was like subconsciously or consciously, maybe a mix of both, was like the idea of shame as a theme. And
Mm.
for 12 Steps, it was, you know, a character who was experiencing shame of having an alcoholic as a father and like the recovery process and like what life looks like after. And for Canceled, it was a character who was like experiencing this insular high school shame for something she didn't do. And
There was a friendship wrinkle, wasn't there? The banana was hooking up with somebody's ex-boyfriend, and so that threw a friendship into turmoil.
it was, yeah. So my main character is falsely accused of, yeah, hooking up with her ex best friend's boyfriend. And that was just, another layer of drama. And they had already had a friendship falling out. And I think friendship in both books is something I like to include as sort of like an ensemble cast because I think it's fun. And in high school, like friends are so important to like your experience and having people in your corner in your circle.
I like this potential for stakes there because I'm imagining that it's like getting a divorce. Half the friend group goes with one person, half the friend group goes with the other person. And now they're kind of like two teams, rivals.
Yeah, yeah. I think for canceled, it was more of like the student body who didn't really like know the main character versus like her and her friends. And yeah, like I think that would have such a huge impact on someone who's already dealing with the stress of like exams and college decisions and all of this that you're experiencing at that age.
I'm so glad that I'm not in high school anymore and can like choose my friends. Like I don't have to like other than my children who sometimes sometimes are a problematic element, I don't have to be surrounded by anybody I don't want to be surrounded by.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, romance, especially right now,
Mhm.
romance is having such a moment in YA. And I have clients who come to me, aspiring writers, and they're like, I just feel like I'm dead in the water if I don't include a romance in my young adult manuscript. Would be better if it was a romantasy because that's also very, very popular now. Do you feel that that is a requirement? And is that one of your strengths, or do you just kind of do it because that's what kids are experiencing, or do you do it because you feel you have to, or are you really excited about it? What's the deal with romance?
Okay, for me, well, first of all, I will say I don't think it's a requirement. I don't think it has to be a requirement. Like, write what you like, and you can, you can create stakes and points of tension without romance. For me personally, I like romance a lot. In the two books that I have published now, would kind of say that romance is probably like the C story. If we're talking about like A, B, and C story. Um,
For those of us who are not steeped in screenwriting and theory, can you tell us what those are?
I can try to the best of my ability. I am no expert, but I will say, like, I did take like a TV structure writing class at the beginning of this year, and I would encourage like all writers to take a structure class of any kind because it is helpful just seeing information presented in different ways. But like for example, I think like canceled the A story is like figuring the mystery of like who wants to frame her and kind of getting her reputation back, and like the B story is some drama she's dealing with her family, and the C story is like the slow burn romance, and, like, kind of like do I call it like a forbidden romance? I think there's like some yeah, some drama and stuff that gets in the way of that too. So it wasn't like when I think pick up a romance book, like the problems revolve around like the two main characters like falling in love.
Will they, won't they?
Exactly.
They're approaching one another. They're sort of retreating. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I love that. I eat it up. I love the genre and I love including it. I will say like this next book that I have coming out, which I think is going to come out next year. We're still in the phase of like editing and timelines and all of that. But it this story is more like romance forward, like love triangle forward, and
Ooh.
it's a little speculative too, and I think it was just like the nature of like what the idea was, and that's been a lot of fun to explore. And just as someone who's like read so much, even like we were talking about Sarah Dessen growing up, and it's like contemporary romance stories, and even like now reading contemporary romance, and you brought up like fantasy romance and romantasy. Um, I would say if the like plot and idea and characters sort of lend itself to the like the will they and won't they of it all, like falling in love, yeah, like it's write it if it feels true to your idea and story, but don't feel like pressured to like write it just because it feels like a trend in the industry right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to your concept of authenticity. If it doesn't feel real, if it doesn't feel true to either the audience or the story that you want to tell or your own passions and experiences, that's going to come across on the page. So that's kind of my answer too. I mean, I love that we're on the same page. Bad publishing joke, but yeah, I feel like for the people who really kind of hold their nose at romance, don't do it. Just it's not going to tickle the readers in the way that they like to be tickled. That's kind of that sounded a little spicy, given the context. But I found that the people who do include romance, who love romance, they admire romance. They don't think that it's like, oh, romance, like, oh, it's so tropey, so da da da. You know, they're actual consumers of romance. They're passionate about romance and they include romance because they genuinely want to. And I think that's the only way that it really works.
Yeah. And also, tropes are fun. Tropes
So
are a good time.
yeah, some writers are not really into trends, don't really spend a lot of time learning the market or reading what else is out there, and they kind of hold their nose at tropes as well. What would you say to them, and how do you pick the tropes that you want to work with, and where do you find them? I've had that question, like where do I find tropes?
Oh, this is a great question. I think I think it, I would go back to like looking at the idea and the story that you have, and um, hold on, let me think about this for a second.
While you think, I'm just going to plug tvtropes.org. It is an all consuming wiki of just collections of all kinds of tropes, plot tropes, character tropes. I know it says TV, and it is a lot of the sort of examples that they provide are from film and TV, but it just has every single trope that you could ever. It's overwhelming. The tagline is all consuming culture wiki.
Yeah, I think I when I'm looking at tropes, I think I'm looking at like story first, and yeah, going back to what we were talking about, what rings true to the plot and to these characters and like what they're going through. And when you are like looking at the middle, the murky middle, or like the fun and games part of the story, I think that's where you can have a lot of fun with tropes, because I think tropes like add stakes to like story. And I don't know if it's something that I personally have been like, okay, I'm going to pick like 5 tropes and make sure I can fit them in. Or I'm like just looking at the beat sheet. I think this is more of what I do, just like looking at the story and figuring out like, oh, is this something, can I work this in here? Like, would that be fun? Would that be fun for me to read? Does it seem compelling? Um, but yeah, I would be interested to hear if like other authors do that. If they're like, okay, I'm like really interested in like picking out these tropes and then formulating like a plot around the tropes. Cause I also think that could be a way to write story. It's just not a way that I've experimented with.
Yeah. So I have an IP development company called Bittersweet Books with literary agent John Cusick and author Julie Murphy, and we don't we say that the only thing we take seriously is the reader's experience, and that was a really new kind of way of approaching story for me. And for those of you who don't know, a book packager is idea first, concept first. And sometimes we think, like right now, we're working on a couple of dark romance trope concepts where we try to make them a little bit sunnier, a little bit more kind of mass appealing. And so we really do. We're like, okay, we want to work with this trope and we want to give it kind of a spin. And it is a brand new way of working. And some people would, again, hold their nose at this idea of like, crafting a book as a product instead of art. Oh no, But I do think like the people who love tropes, the people who love certain elements, the people who want to use books to escape and relate and be entertained, that kind of fun and games sequence that you just mentioned, which comes from Save the Cat and is basically like playing out your premise, right? The promise of the premise it's supposed to be fun, especially if you're writing in certain categories or you're writing a premise that does have the potential for fun baked into it. And I think that's a big mindset shift for a lot of writers to not take it so seriously. I mean, take your craft seriously. Take the writing and your career and yourself as an author seriously, but it's supposed to be fun too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great hearing about your experience too, because yeah, I feel like you definitely can craft a story around a trope, like thinking of like fake dating, for example. Like that's
Mhm.
a whole problem within itself. Like, why are you fake dating? Like, what is the problems that both of these characters are going through that they need to fake date? And that's it can be so interesting because it's something that you know, it's a trope, so it's been like written about before, obviously. But it can be done so many different ways, and it's like fun. It's fun.
Now that we're being so trope positive, I have to say fake dating is my least favorite trope.
You know what? I don't know if it's like in my top five, I would say. But yeah, I still think it could be fun.
But you're right that it encompasses the whole plot, right? It has its expectations. It's kind of like genre expectations. I was talking about the bumpers at the bowling alley. There's actually a lot of freedom between those bumpers. Like some people think that any kind of guardrail, any kind of like guideline or anything like that is stifling creatively, but actually you can, if you just keep the guardrails in mind, there's a whole bowling lane in between those guardrails. You can still do a lot. You just are working within certain self-imposed constraints and like genre constraints or trope constraints.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds like you also do a lot of reading, which is great. One of my biggest kind of head scratchers is when somebody wants to be a published author, but they don't read, they don't want to pollute their creative well, they don't, but it sounds like you are an avid reader. Do you read critically? Do you try to sort of pick up structure? And do you sort of analyze while you read? And what do you read?
I feel like I am all over the place with reading. I genre wise, let's see, like I mentioned romance, young adult, literary fiction, mystery thrillers. Like I'll read everything, especially if it comes like recommended from a friend. Yeah, there's no limit to like what I like will and won't pick up. And I think in the beginning, before I really understood structure and story, I was just, reading for fun. But I do like to say, like, no matter if you're reading a book or if you're watching a movie or if you're watching a show, all of these things, they're different mediums, but they're all still telling a story. And I think even if you're like, I want to turn my brain off and like watch TV, and I feel bad because I'm just wasting time watching TV, I'm like, well, think about like what are the beats that this story is hitting? Like, can you think about it like a little bit more critically? And then, you're still kind of like, um, what is the word I'm looking for? Like understanding and learning about story. So yeah, in the beginning stages, I think it was more for fun. And then when I was trying to take myself a little bit more seriously, I was like, okay, like how are these authors or, screenwriters structuring things? And, I don't know if it, I don't know if it would be like on the more critical level, but just on the more like, now that I like have the story structure in my head and just seeing how others do it.
Yeah, it'll ruin just mindless entertainment for anyone to try and read or watch more actively. But it's like, are you me? Because I won't sit down to watch anything unless I can kind of play along, unless I can, oh, what are they doing here? And da 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 da. And it just, on the one hand, it's wonderful. On the other hand, it's like, I'd like to turn my brain off sometimes. That would
Mhm.
be just like it's overheating up there. And so you are in Los Angeles
I am.
and you are sort of looking at screenwriting. Is that because you want to write for the screen as well, or is it to bolster your novel work, or a little bit of both? What's the dream?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I during like lockdown in 2020, I joined a friend group that was made up of like friends who were doing screenwriting, whether they were like had been in rooms or just starting or had something made. And those friends like really helped me in the beginning stages, and even now with my earlier scripts. But I think at that stage I was like, I'm just going to do this for fun because it's storytelling in a way that's a little bit different. And I'm like, can I write a whole story in like 30 pages for like a TV pilot? That sounds like an interesting challenge. And then being in Los Angeles and just being around the industry and being in Hollywood, it's inspiring seeing other people do it. So I'm like, yeah, like why not? Why not try? So I am nowhere near, you know, I think at any stage where, I have something that's like getting made or something, I'm still just sort of writing for the fun of it and seeing where things go. But yeah, I think down the line that would be a fun dream to have come true.
And what formats are interesting to you? You mentioned like a half an hour format pilot. Are you like thinking about features? Are you thinking about limited series? Are you thinking about like something bigger and broader?
I think the two things I wanted to try and challenge myself to write was a feature and a TV pilot. And I have a sitcom sample. Oh my God, say that 10 times fast. And I have a feature that desperately needs a lot of revising, but it was fun. It was really fun experimenting and trying my hand at both of them. Yeah.
I love that. So, all right, as we wrap up here, Farrah, you have just published Canceled in March 2024. You have another novel coming out, young adult with speculative and romantic elements, coming out maybe 2025. We'll see. We'll watch this space.
Yeah.
And of course, the glitter and stardust of Hollywood is sort of descending on you right now as you learn and grow as a writer, which I think is one of the coolest things. Like, you are not resting on your laurels. You're reading intentionally. You're learning storycraft from different angles. I think screenwriting is fantastic for anyone who wants to learn structure. I love that sort of Jessica Brody has run with it and sort of adapted it for the novel, but I feel like there are a lot of screenwriting Bibles that a lot of novelists just disregard, right? Because they're like, oh, that's not my lane. I'm not interested in that. But I feel like there is such a wealth of knowledge. And yeah, you have to kind of disregard this like formulaic bias against screenwriting, because it is, as soon as you start getting into it, a lot of it seems very formulaic. But again, I think that there's so much to learn, and I love that you're doing that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any last word of advice? So we have be authentic, we have learn structure. What else do you want to leave writers with?
Oh my gosh, what do I want to leave writers with? No
I
pressure.
hate this question, so I ask it because
Yeah.
at least I'm not in the hot seat.
Of course, of course. I will say, at the beginning, I was talking a little bit about my publishing journey and talking about like, yeah, it's not always easy. And I think like outward facing, public facing, it can look like easy when you're seeing these deals, but you never know what other writers and authors are going through, how many books and how many agents or how, like, you never know what people's struggles are to get to where they are. So I don't know, as corny as it sounds, like just continue to write the next thing. If you really love it, if you really believe in it, just continue to write the next thing and don't give up. Oh my God, I sound like a motivational ad. But really, like, if you love
I
it,
love a good bumper sticker. Don't even worry about it.
don't give up, and just know that you can go through challenges and struggles. But I think also that's what makes the reward of it all like even sweeter.
I love that. And notice 2.5 manuscripts. I'm calling the partial a half manuscript, right?
That's
Two and a
it.
half manuscripts went on submission. The agent is not a silver bullet in all cases. These are the stories we don't hear, which was, I went on submission and my project didn't sell. But you did something that a lot of people don't do in that scenario, which is you kept going. You had another idea, you learned your craft, and you just sort of hunkered down for the long haul, which I think is truly, truly inspirational.
Oh, thank you.
Farrah Penn, it was a pleasure and a joy. And dogs and lawnmowers be darned. We did it. Thank you so much for joining us. And here's to a good story.
My God, thank you. This was so fun. I'm, again, honored to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to the Good Story Podcast. This is Mary Cole. I want to give a shout out to my amazing Good Story Company team, Jenna Van Roy, Kate London, Kaylee Pereira, Mikal Leah, Amy Wilson, Kristen Overman, and Rhiannon Richardson. You can find us and all of the wonderful resources that we create for writers just like you at goodstorycompany.com. Sign up for our newsletter and get non-spammy updates about everything that we're doing and the latest and greatest in webinars and other resources. And here's to a good story.